flu outbreak in the United States has reached pandemic levels, accounting for more than 7.2% of the deaths in the country. It raises some interesting questions about the choices that are being made in terms of spending, risk management. Rob, you're having to think about this.
If you think about influenza versus terrorism, okay, they're both kind of, I mean, no one's really
to society.
Yeah, they're both extreme. One of these things they're tail threats to society. You know, occasionally you have to worry about them, and occasionally something really, really big and disastrous happens. And the problem is that flu is probably a bigger threat than terrorism is. However, because it's not very novel, you know, in other words, everyone gets the flu and no one really worries about it, the government doesn't spend nearly as much as it should on that versus how much they spend on terrorism.
I mean, there was an interesting situation about a year ago, sort of pointing these things up where, you know, the threat of flu was kind of being interpreted as a possible threat of terrorism. Basically, some researchers were trying to figure out how the flu could get super infective and create the kind of pandemic that, you know, we saw 100 years ago and which killed a huge number of people. And the US government didn't want some of these studies published in full because they worried that that information might help a terrorist make a dangerous...
So there's some linkage maybe between the two. I mean,
the interesting about that case was that the government, and eventually people said, okay, what are the real risks? The risk is someone could create this virus. The danger is that actually this is already happening out there. You know, when a pig gets human flu and it gets an avian flu, they mix, and what happens? It creates a new version of flu.
So it happens naturally.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is, you know, every year about 36,000 Americans die from flu. You know, and during like this year, it's a really bad flu season. It's probably going to be more. I mean, how many Americans actually die of terrorism? Very few. Yet the annual budget for Homeland Security is about $70 billion. For flu, we spent $7 billion over the past like 4 or 5 years. We're just seriously not spending very much money.
Why? I mean, why is that happening? I mean, is it a headline? Is it a political thing? Is it a what do you reckon in terms of policy decisions here?
Controlling flu is really hard. I mean, you can actually close borders. You can actually do things that keep bad people out if you can figure out who they are. It's much harder to keep flu out. It's not obviously effective in the same way.
It's boring. I think that's the problem.
And it doesn't
telling people they need to get a shot and need to wash their hands. I mean, okay, that's probably not the sexiest thing in the world, as opposed to, you know, we're going to put armed marshals on every flight. The problem is that washing your hands getting a flu shot is much more likely to save your life than, you know, putting an armed marshal on board an airplane.
Well, we're looking forward to that piece. Should be an interesting look at risk management. We'll also be back with more Breaking Views tomorrow.